Welcome to the VI Department of Education's 2020-2021 Parent and Community Educational Conference. Research has shown that parental involvement is a key factor in student achievement and students' overall success in life. It is also known to be true that parents tend to participate more in their child's education when they know how and when they feel knowledgeable and equipped with the tools to do so. With this in mind, the VI Department of Education has provided professional development for parents over the years, and we are pleased to continue providing this important and necessary support. What's new at the department, however, is the professional development we are providing for the VI community. This change is due to the fact that successful school systems have strong, positive, and consistent community support. And with this goal of rebuilding the community's trust in the Virgin Islands public education system, I am delighted to bring this educational conference to you. Your participation in today's conference will help to transform our public education system. I look forward to hearing about your experience today and the areas of the VI public education system you would like to learn more about. Remember, together we can transform public education in the Virgin Islands. Enjoy today's session.
And we'd like to say a pleasant good afternoon to those of us on Zoom as well as those joining us on Facebook. My name is Karen Chancellor, and I'm the Director of the Office of School and Community Relations with the Virgin Islands Department of Education, St. Croix District. And this evening, we're so honored and so happy to have with us Ms. Kaylin Foy and Ms. Darlene Springer, and they will be sharing with us about domestic abuse. And they are from DBSAC, also known as the Virgin Islands Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Council. And why this is so important to our families and our community is that these are aspects that affect the way our children learn. And I know that every family just wants their children to be successful academically, socially, and emotionally. And sometimes we as adults may be going through some sort of abusive or violent situation at home. And other times our children may be going through some sort of violent or abusive situation that we're not aware of. And so these professionals will let us know how we can tell and what we can do about it, and also the effects that it has on our children. So thank you. I'd like us to give a warm welcome to Kaylin Foy and Darlene Springer.
Thank you so much for having us. We appreciate you. So today, thank you for the invitation to talk about this very important issue. I want to first talk a little bit about DVSAC and our mission. Our mission is to coordinate education, prevention, and response efforts in order to reduce the incidence of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence, and to make these crimes socially and culturally unacceptable in the United States Virgin Islands. And that's what DVSAC's all about. Some of the things that we do at DVSAC, just to give people a little bit of background about us, we support the reduction and the eventual elimination of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, dating violence in the territory. We support and promote quality programs which empower victims and hold perpetrators accountable. We conduct educational efforts such as this to heighten awareness about the extent and characteristics of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence in the territory. And we work to improve the response of the legal system, service providers, and media. We do this through our prevention education campaigns, training and professional development that we'll offer to businesses, to nonprofit organizations, the schools, government organizations, faith-based communities, just to name a few. We collaborate with the various stakeholders in the community to look for solutions. We have a faith-based domestic violence and sexual assault committee that we encourage faith-based leaders to join us with. We have media campaigns. We recently had a campaign highlighting men in the community who were speaking out against domestic violence. We work with policy and legislation against in regards to these issues to strengthen the response in the territory, as we have a criminal justice committee as well, and we have a court watch program, and we work closely with the courts to make sure that their response is strong and support survivors in holding perpetrators accountable. So talking about domestic violence and what the problem is, and why are we even talking about this? Because domestic violence affects 1 in 4 women. It also affects men. Men are comprised of maybe less than 1% of all cases, but it does affect men. And where these statistics come from is reporting. So this is where, unfortunately, men don't report as much, even though we know that it happens. So when we talk about domestic violence, we're really saying that it affects everybody, men, women, of all ages, gender, education, social, economic class, sexual orientation, etc. Unfortunately, senior citizens are affected, as well as children who are often witness to domestic violence, and our teens who are affected in regards to teen dating violence. Domestic violence homicides, unfortunately, are on the rise. So that's why this is a very critical conversation to have, because it affects everyone. It impacts the victims, communities, and the impact is also felt within our schools. Most people, when thinking about what is domestic violence, only think about the abuse, physical abuse portion, but that's actually 1 in 8 tactics used in a system of power and control. When we talk about domestic violence, we're talking about intimate partner violence, domestic abuse, or relationship abuse. It's a pattern of behavior used by one intimate partner to maintain power and control over another. This is a power and control wheel. This is just a sample. I'm just going to go over a few things of some of the things that comprise domestic violence. So using coercion and threats, threatening to hurt the victim, threatening to hurt themselves, threatening to hurt other people in the family, intimidating, making the victim afraid by using looks or gestures, smashing, destroying property, keying cars, slashing tires, using emotional abuse, saying that the person isn't smart, putting them down, putting down their looks, saying that nobody likes them, making them feel guilty about doing nothing, using isolation. Sometimes this happens in the territory where a person is taken from one island or the mainland or back and forth, and isolating the victim away from all their friends and family who are there to support them. Controlling where they go, who they see, who they talk to, who's texting them, who they're allowed to be friends with on social media. Using jealousy to justify actions. Minimizing, denying, and blaming is making light of the abuse and the situation. Like, well, it was your fault anyway, because if you didn't, fall down, you wouldn't have hurt yourself, even though they were pushed. Making light of the abuse, taking the concerns not seriously. Using children. So in using children, it's making the victim feel guilty about the children. Or if I don't do this, then perhaps me and my children will be homeless. Or the abuser will say, well, if you leave, I'm going to take custody of the children because I have the car, the job, the house, everything is in my name. So the courts are going to grant the children to me. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to harm the children. Or using the children to pass messages, even after the victim has managed to leave, but because of parenting time and visitation rights, they get to see the children and then pass, it might be secret coded messages of abuse to the victim or threats. Using male privilege, basically saying that the belief of, because I'm the man of the house, I can do this abuse. But using male privilege can also be found in LGBT communities as well. Using economic abuse is when you're preventing the victim from having access to any financial resources. That can include their own check if they're working, their name isn't on the house, the rent, the victim's name isn't on the credit cards, the bank statements, just not having access or a free reign of any economic resources. So that's just a very quick overview of some of the things that comprise domestic violence. The thing with this is you could take these same things and apply it to even teen dating violence and senior citizens, or in any situation where you have intimate partner violence. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Darlene Springer.
Good evening, listening audience. I just wanted to interject the roles for DVSAC. I'm one of the committee outreach specialists for the island of St. Croix. And most likely, I'm the one who goes into school and do a lot of the prevention education. I start from preschool and I go all the way up to 12th grade, even to UVI, if I'm invited. Next slide. I kind of interject for this reason because I want to kind of talk about teen dating violence. A lot of you might know teen dating violence is on the rise here in the Virgin Islands. And a lot of you might even know that teen dating violence is a serious issue that's happening in the school. Teen dating violence most likely happen with teens or somebody who's dating someone. And like Ms. Fair just talked about, it can be someone female to male, it could be male and male, and it could also be female and female. And we seem not to forget the culture is actually changing right now. So we have a lot of LGBT violence that's actually going on, and we got to keep that in mind. Our culture is changing here in the Virgin Islands, and we have, that is actually on the rise when it comes down to teen dating violence. I'm not going to read the definition because the definition is right there, which is right there for you guys to read, but I'm going to give you a brief definition. Is someone who's dating someone and there's abuse that's happening in that relationship, most likely, and there are different types that happen in that relationship, and it's about power and control as teen dating violence. Most likely, our teens are dating, and some of them don't even know the word of dating, but our teens are dating at a very young age. So they might be calling they're together or whatever the situation, or hooking up or whatever the situation, but they're starting at an elementary, actually getting involved into a relationship. And we might call it boyfriend and girlfriend, whatever. But once abuse is happening and when that person is actually in a romantic relationship with that person, or even on the side, whatever, that's where you have teen dating violence, which is happening. I also want to add on to what Ms. Thea was saying with domestic violence. It's a learned behavior. It's something that people experience through culture. So a lot of these experience, a lot of culture where it's domestic violence, actually generational come down to teen dating violence because they're actually portraying what they have seen that's actually happening in their own, so at the home. So that is something I want to take into consideration when it comes down to teen dating violence. Teen dating violence actually also, it's February where we bring awareness in the school and we let teens know that, hey, there's a month for you for us to bring awareness where violence is actually happening, just to bring awareness that teens do go through the fact that they're getting abused also too. So I want you to take that in place also too. So there is a month for our teens, you know, so for they could bring awareness, and also keep in mind for they to understand what is it and what they can do also if they're going through it. Because we're trying to actually reduce the incident, and we also want to teach our teens, not only the teens, but adolescents also who are in relationship, what is a healthy and an unhealthy relationship. So I wanted to put it back on to Ms. Fair. Just letting everybody know I am Darlene Springer, the committee outreach specialist for the island of St. Croix. I'm actually doing virtual presentation also if anyone wants any virtual presentation. Caitlin?
Awesome, thank you. As you can see from this stat that nearly 1 in 11 girls and 1 in 15 boys have reported physical dating violence in the last year. Like, that's a high number. So this is a very serious topic to talk about and to be aware of in our schools. We also, even the smaller children, being a witness to domestic violence and how that affects them mentally, emotionally, socially, how they view relationships. There's a statistic, and I don't know the number of it, but because it's not a good, they haven't gotten good numbers on it, but there are people that are trying to get the data on the number of children that are actually injured from trying to protect their parent during a domestic violence physical altercation. So that's where a child tries to jump in the way to try to protect the victim, who is their parent during that situation. And there's also a number of children and teenagers who've actually been murdered in these same type of situations. So this is very serious. So some signs of abuse, because sometimes you might not know if you're going through this or somebody else. People often ask about the signs, or if your child. It's really more challenging now with the younger people noticing the signs, because a lot of it is happening social media wise. So if you think about, I'm going to age myself so you can see how old I am through this example. So when I was younger, we had phones with cords on them, right? And my mother would be in the kitchen cooking, and I would be in the living room, and I would take the kitchen phone all the way to the living room with the cord, and I'm talking to my friends. And if my mother heard like me crying or me getting upset, she could hear me. She could hear the conversation, and she would come into the living room and say, "Hey, what's going on? What's going on with this conversation?" Unfortunately, we don't have that ability now with children doing the majority of their communication through text, through inbox, through, you know, these other means of communicating that aren't verbal with someone else. So it takes a lot more observation from parents and a lot more communicating with your children. But here's just a sample of some signs. So the abuser monitors what you do all the time, unfairly accuses you of being unfaithful all the time, prevents you from seeing friends or family, prevents you from going to work, doing your schoolwork, your homework, controls how you spend your money. That's even with our college kids and their student refund check can be compromised in these type of situations. Deciding what you should do or where you should go, what you should eat, where you should wear, humiliates you in front of others, makes you feel bad all the time, destroys your property and things you care about, threatens to hurt you, threatens to hurt your pets. Actually, a person hurting pets or hurting animals, it's a high correlation between that type of person being an abuser in an intimate partner relationship. And of course, physical violence. Threatens to use or shows a weapon, forces you to have sex against your will, that is actually rape, blames you for violent outbursts, threatens to harm themselves or yourself, or says things like, if I can't have you, then no one will. Some challenges of survivors in our community, sometimes people can be not understanding and compassionate and say, well, why don't they just leave? Or, you know, I would never go through this situation, but you never know what a person is going through. So compassion is in order, and you don't realize how hard it is to actually leave a situation as well. So dealing with current and abuse, trauma, transportation issues are huge. You know, transportation is not the best. Living wage, employment options is really hard to live on your own with the minimum wage or maybe a low paying job. Fair working conditions, limited banking options is a challenge. Healthcare is a huge burden and a huge barrier, and just general lack of institutional support. Housing is huge. Being non-English speaking, immigration concerns can also play into that. You can have an abuser who threatens to call immigration on a victim to keep them in the situation. Childcare challenges and concerns around religion can also be challenging for many survivors in the territory. Leaving can be very, very dangerous. So it's really easy for us to say, well, why don't they leave? And it was me, I would leave. But unfortunately, many of the fatalities of victims happen when they try to leave. Now, thinking of what I was talking of earlier about the system of power and control, and so the abuser wants to have full power and control over the victim. At the point that they feel that they're losing the power and control is where the abuse starts to escalate, and they use other methods. And unfortunately, this is when fatalities happen. Safety planning is essential. Connecting with a local program in the territory, which would be Family Resource Center on St. Thomas and St. John, and the Women's Coalition of St. Croix on St. Croix, will help you to create a safety plan to leave. If your child, your teenager needs safety planning, they can help with that too. Encourage people to keep their safety plan confidential, especially from the abuser. Of course, you know, confidentiality can be a challenge in our smaller knit community, but it's possible if we understand how serious it is to keep this information confidential. Victims, you know, when we talk about, well, why don't they leave? You know, victims could feel that the abuser will escalate and that they could die. Like, that's serious. The victim could remember, you know, this has been some of the good times. It's not like these relationships are probably generally like everyday bad. Maybe it was good in the beginning. And so they do love this person, and they might hope that things get a little better. In addition to the manipulation and the emotional abuse and the mental abuse that they've experienced. Victims might not know what options are available. And so that's why we're here to talk about the options that are available in this community to help. These options are available in our own territory. And sometimes the fear is that homelessness might be the only option, and that can scare someone to leave. Not having anywhere to go, maybe it's religious or cultural beliefs, or maybe you might feel like a two-family household is better, even if the two-family household is causing your child mental and emotional distress and trauma. Fear of leaving the custody of your children, lack of means to support yourself if you leave, like, well, what do I do if I go? And not having support from friends and family. Unfortunately, a reason why victims might stay. So domestic violence affects children in a lot of different ways. In addition to being direct victims of the physical abuse, children who witness domestic violence can also become abusers themselves. They can also risk long-term and short-term physical, mental health, and physical challenges from being in this type of environment. Children who witness violence between parents can be at a greater risk of, you know, becoming an abuser. And if you're a person who's in this victimized situation, you might not know how to protect your child. And these are the things that we're talking about. You definitely want to work with the local program who can help you walk through these steps to help you. So how can you help a child who's witnessed domestic violence? First, you want to help them to feel safe, because they feel very unsafe all the time. You want to also talk to them about healthy relationships. You want to talk to them about their fears. Let them know it is not their fault. And listen to them. Listen to what they're saying. Listen, don't just interject with your own opinions. You definitely want to talk to them about and model healthy relationships. And this is where our Darlene goes into the schools, and we have a community outreach person on every island who goes into the schools and talks to the children about healthy relationships, about safe and healthy touch, about, you know, self-esteem and building themselves. But it's not just our program. We need the community to also wrap their arms around the children in their territory as well. We need to talk to the children about boundaries. We need to let them know if touch isn't uncomfortable, that they can have autonomy over their own bodies is important. We need to help them to know who is a support system for them, in addition to a parent. Because of course, as a parent, you're gonna say, oh, I'm here for you, I can talk to you, but maybe they don't, just being realistically, maybe they don't feel comfortable going to you because maybe they wanna talk about you, you know, or the issues. Letting them know that there's another safe person that they could talk to, because their safety is what's most important. And definitely to get them some professional help. And it's okay. Domestic violence isn't the victim's fault. It isn't the child's fault. Just because you get help, that's not saying that you're admitting that it's your fault. It's not. But help is available. We're just here to help support you. What if your child is actually the victim or an abuser? So definitely you want to observe your child to see if they're, you know, being more withdrawn, or if they're acting differently in any type of way. You want to talk to them, you want to support them. And if you just aren't sure, definitely contact one of the local programs for assistance. There is a national program that focuses strictly on children and teen dating violence, and it's called loveisrespect.org. You can also visit that website to get tip sheets, information. They have a whole fact section about, well, what if it's my friend? What if it's my family member? You know, if you're another teenager, they have a chat room and everything. So that's also a great resource to tap into. So after we talk about all this, you could actually be the first point of contact to help for a victim in the territory. And that's a child, a teen, an adult. And you are a critical component. You're like, well, how can I be a help? You know, I don't know. I'm not a domestic violence advocate. Well, that's the beauty. We are not asking to be a domestic violence advocate, but you've now been empowered to know who to refer them to, who to call. Like, oh, I went to this program. I heard about these programs in the area. Let me call Family Resource Center. Let me call the Women's Coalition of St. Croix. I didn't know that they did all that. I didn't know that they work with children. I didn't know that they would help us with the teens. I didn't know they had counseling. So now you know they have housing. They have all these programs. And at the end, I'll go into a list of what some of the programs they are. I do want to mention there is help for victims. And so the question is also often, how do I move on? How do I recover from this situation that was very traumatic and that affected me? I think it's important. There's a lot of conversations around forgiveness, especially within faith-based institutions and moving on. And I would say it does take time. Don't beat yourself up about it, definitely. Forgiving is a good thing, but I ask you to stay safe in doing that. So it's not necessary for you to contact the abuser to let them know that you forgave them. You don't have to meet them for lunch. You don't have to call them. You don't have to text them. You could just forgive in your heart as a form of your own healing. Seek help. Don't blame yourself and don't blame other victims. Because sometimes we go through things and then we say, well, all I had to do was this, and it's easy. You should just do this, and you should just do that. Everybody's situation is different. So allow grace for the next person, just as grace was extended for you. You want to create a safety plan. Again, you could do that with the Family Resource Center and the Women's Coalition on St. Croix. And you want to seek out programs. You want to seek out faith-based support or any spiritual practice that you might be in that resonates with you. You want to think about, some self-care for yourself. What can I do to move forward and be a whole person moving forward? Because it wasn't my fault, right? So some victim safety protocol. If you see something, say something, call the Virgin Islands Police Department. If you see something in action, if there's something going on right then, you want to call the police department to get emergency support. Contact your local program. They can help with the rest and create a safety plan. Those are the 3 things I definitely want you to know today from this program. Again, I would just want to state that confidentiality is a definite must. If someone trusts you with their story or asks you for help, that's not something to gossip about later or talk about. Keep it to yourself. If you know that somebody's going through a situation, don't disclose where they are, where they're going, who they're living with, even casually to someone else. You just don't know how these things get repeated. If I forgot to mention this earlier, but if anybody has any questions or comments, you could put them in the chat in Zoom, and as well as on Facebook. There are people monitoring that, so we can answer them at the end of the presentation. So I want to give you DVSAC's information. So if you want to call us to do a presentation or come do some training or technical assistance with your organization, program, church, nonprofit, government agency, we are definitely here to do that. We could customize a training program specifically for your audience. The Women's Coalition of St. Croix, I want to make sure you have their phone number as well as their website. They have a 24-hour hotline to help individuals on St. Croix. Some of the things they do, they work, of course, with crisis intervention. Emergency person is available 24 hours to meet you in emergency room or police station. They have emergency shelter, a transitional housing program, support groups, education programs. They also do community education. They have a community thrift store, and they do emergency legal advocacy. Then we have Family Resource Center on St. Thomas. This is their phone number and website. Make sure you get it. If you don't, if you need any of these resources, you could definitely contact the Department of Education and they'll give it to you, or you could just contact DVSAC and we could give it to you as well. Family Resource Center, they do crisis counseling, and this is on St. Thomas, St. John. Emergency shelter for victims. They have support groups in English and Spanish. They do emergency legal advocacy. They have parenting education classes, individual and group counseling for adult survivors. They have an anger management program for men, and they also have a separate anger management program for women. They have a boutique, and they do outreach awareness as well. This is the teen dating violence hotline that I mentioned. It's an awesome resource. It's loveisrespect.org. There's a national domestic violence hotline. Their website has a lot of information as well. You know, people ask the question, well, why is this person abusing this person? How can I help a friend? How can I help a loved one? They have a lot of information like that on their website. It's thehotline.org. And there's some websites that can also help you in regards to overcoming the effect of economic abuse. And the Allstate Foundation, you can just Google Allstate Foundation and domestic violence. There is a scholarship for survivors of domestic violence or victims of domestic violence to return to school for any post-secondary education, community college, UVI, university, anything of that nature. Is the Women's Independent Scholarship Program, and they have money set aside specifically for victims of domestic violence to return to school. So you could contact DVSAC or one of the local programs to assist you with that. And there is now an app for helping with safety planning as well. We still encourage you to connect with the local programs that help you through this and walk you through it. But it's myplanapp.org if you wanted that resource. So do we have any questions from chat or Facebook? You're on mute, I didn't catch that.
None from Facebook, none from the chat so far.
Okay.
That means that you gave clear information.
I hope so. It could also mean that, you know, this is a challenging conversation. Yeah. Sometimes people need to marinate on it a little bit.
To ask you something. Oh, someone asked if you can please put up the numbers again. I believe the numbers for Women's Coalition as well as your numbers for DVSAC.
All right, I'm just gonna go back through. I'll just go back through that part.
And while you're putting up those numbers, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You know, in our culture, sorry, excuse me a minute. In our culture, it is kind of taboo for young men or boys to say that they have been sexually assaulted. What is your take on that? And have you ever encountered anything like that in our community? Because we know it happens. It's just that there's a stigma behind reporting it.
There is a stigma behind it. And this is why it's important to talk about it. And one of our other colleagues, Jeanette John Baptiste, has been really out there in the community trying to encourage men to speak up about it. And she even tried to have like a round table with men. And it's just, I think it's gonna really take other men to help us in this effort to reduce the stigma around it, to say you are a victim. It's not for you to be ashamed of. You were victimized, you were raped. Nobody asked for that. Nobody deserves that.
Yes.
And it'll definitely take a culture shift. It's going to take a lot of awareness and conversation around the issue. I mean, if you think about how far domestic violence came, of which it's still a long way to go, you know, and so when the conversation first started only 40 years ago around domestic violence, and it was always the victim's fault. Well, what is she doing? Well, what did she say? She must have did something. And so to kind of, people still say those things today, but you don't hear it as, it's gradually fading away. The same thing will go with men being sexually assaulted. It is a crime. It's illegal. It's immoral. You know, any major religion will speak out against it, but yet it's still this secret that's on the victim, which is ridiculous.
You know, I have another question. And as you transition to the next slide for Women's Coalition, someone asked, is it possible for someone who has recovered from being an abuser to fall back into their old abusive habits?
Well, I think that, I think this is where it's important for abusers to connect with the programs as well, because our programs have outreach and support groups for those who have abused. We want everybody to be healthy and well and whole. That includes abusers. We want you to be whole and have the capacity to be in a functioning, non-abusive relationship.
So it is possible for them to fall back. It's possible for them to fall back into to be an abuser again.
Definitely without support. I mean, a person could say, a liar could say, oh, you know, I stopped lying, but they haven't done any of the work, the hard work that it would take to just change your ways. You know what I'm saying? So that would be in anything in life that you would need that kind of support. It's
I'm
hard
glad you're saying that.
Stop smoking without support. You know, there's some people that can go cold turkey, but for most people, you need some type of support. So
also, you got to think of the fact that a lot of the time with these abusers, because of something that they know and they're comfortable with this type of power and control that they had also too. It's like someone who's on drugs. I mean, the person came out of a drug for many, many years, you understand? And then what, 10, 20 years, and then after a while, they're using drugs again.
Yes. And I have a question again, and it's kind of playing devil's advocate in a sense. So what if I'm just, oh, I'm sorry. And I want to point out what you just said. You just said it is possible, especially if they don't have the right supports or they didn't do the work to get there. So a man that maybe, or a woman that abuses you, then brings you flowers the next day and says, I'm sorry, it is likely that this is going to happen again. It's happened twice, it's happened 3 times. He just keeps saying, or she just keeps saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. You made me do it. Why do you always push my buttons? Why do you always make me hit you? If you would just do what's right, I won't have to do this. And so that it is likely that person will continue because they've gone through no programs. They've gone through nothing to show that they did the work to work on themselves. They haven't accepted the reality that they're responsible for what they do to you, not for what you've done. They're responsible for themselves and they haven't accepted that. But what if
so what you just described is actually called the cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
There's a time it's called like the honeymoon period. It's nice. It might be when you first met or in between times. It might be a pause where no incidents happen and then things escalate and some form of abuse, like a physical abuse might happen, or during the pause, it might be some of the emotional or mental abuse things you might not notice. Then a big incident might happen. And then you have it like reverts back to this honeymoon cycle again, and the cycle just repeats itself. But the issue is, the bigger problem is that every time the cycle repeats, it tends to escalate to a high level. And that's really a dangerous thing.
What if what if it's my fault? What if maybe if I had cooked dinner better, or maybe if I had dressed nicer, maybe if I had lost weight? Because what if it's just the things that I do that push him to be so angry? He told me he doesn't want me on the phone when he gets home, and then I go on the phone. And so what if it's just me? Is it my fault?
Well, unfortunately, that's what happens with the emotional, mental abuse and the gaslighting kind of convince the victim, it flips the script that somehow the victim is at fault or deserves for a person to control and abuse them. And that's so far from the truth. Nobody deserves it. You've done nothing to warrant being abused and controlled in that way. If you're such a terrible person and you know, we just can't, this relationship isn't working, then
Why doesn't he leave?
Needs to walk away. You don't need to be controlled and hurt and manipulated. That nobody requires that in their whole life.
Now, what if when this guy that I just met, he was going to touch me, and I kind of said no, but maybe I didn't say no forcefully enough, because he was trying to have sex with me, and I was like, no. And then, maybe if I had fought more, is this on me? Is this my fault? Maybe if it was my uncle, and I had just, maybe if I had kind of yelled, because I was kind of scared, if you're scared that it's your uncle, your dad, your grandfather, your mom's boyfriend, maybe it's your fault if you just, don't do enough to stop it.
And so there's a thing called fight, fright, flight, or freeze. So people, we freeze during, traumatic situations. It's like built into us to have these different responses. So the freeze response is a natural response. Again, it's not your fault that you're an observer, you're a child, you're observing the family being abused and assaulted. Is not, as a child, is not your place to interfere, because as I said earlier, that could actually put a child in harm's way. A child can't take on these adult responsibilities of trying to manage a domestic violence relationship. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my personal story. So I am a survivor of domestic violence. And when I was 19 years old, I fell in love. And we had a child together when I was 22. And for a couple of years, about 3-4 years after that, it was Labor Day weekend, and he assaulted me, and he shattered my skull. He shattered my eye socket, and I had to get reconstructive surgery. I have a titanium implant where the bone around my left eye was. And my 4-year-old daughter was, didn't understand. And I remember her as a small child, and she said, "My daddy did that to your eye, didn't he?" And I said, "Why did you say that?" At that time, I wasn't an advocate. I didn't know the words to say. I was like, why would you say that? And I said, "Men aren't supposed to beat on women." Like, that was all I knew. I just did not know how to respond to that. And when she got older in middle school, she found the police photos, the photos we had took to give to the police of my injuries. And she said, "Whoever did this to you, I hope that they were prosecuted." And it took, we at the time, when she was 4, I actually did take her to counseling, and we both went to counseling at a domestic violence program. And now that she's 12, we're going back to a program to talk about healthy relationships. So even if time has passed and these issues come back up with your children, it's okay to even if it was years, and like, okay, we haven't gotten past this, or I don't want this to affect her future relationships and how she views things. And so it was hard, how could this person, because her and her father still had a relationship. She still had parents at the time. I didn't have a relationship with him, but she did. How could this care for do this to my dad, do this to my mom? And it was really hard for her to deal with that and to make peace, I guess, with it. But getting the counseling and the support is important for our children. And for me to say, it wasn't your fault. Because even at 4, at 12, she was saying, well, at 4, I should have did something.
Yeah.
I think it was the time that you guys were arguing, when actually she wasn't at home at the time, but she, in her mind, and how kids process it, and it can linger with them. And so it's important that that we support the children and understand the effect it is.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. you know, and I think that there's so many families that go through these things, but we keep it secret because it's embarrassing. I know, you know, sometimes if a young lady is raped or molested, the mom might tell her, don't tell anybody, you know, this is embarrassing. Don't tell anybody. It's, you know, it's our family business. And then he or she goes to school, and then the teacher doesn't understand why the child is acting this way. And it could be more than one action. It could be like an aggressive type of behavior. It could be maybe a withdrawn type of behavior. You know, it all depends on the individual, but nobody understands. And so we, as teachers, as counselors, monitors, administrators, even as custodial workers, because I know of custodial workers in school that have had such deep relationships with students that they've been a benefit. We can just keep our eyes open and our hearts open to see what lifeline we could throw to these children.
Definitely. And
So
it is not their fault.
So let me just interject there, Ms. Chancellor. Going into school, doing a presentation on teen dating violence presentation, one in the high schools, and I don't name schools when I go into the schools. We went into the different types of teen dating violence. What is the different signs or whatever? I start at the physical. I only went until the sexual. I could not pass whatever the other topics that I had to actually continue the presentation due to the fact that every single one of those girls in that class had a story to tell about sexual abuse. And that day, really for me, being just the community outreach specialist, I mean, that day, I mean, it was with me for months.
Yeah.
Just hearing the stories after story after stories after stories. And believe me, the Department of Education has a role to play on our children's lives. I mean, they have come, some of them who have come to teachers, to principals, and tell whatever situation, and nothing didn't happen. No kind of help counseling for these students. So we got a lot of broken, and we have a lot of female out there who have some serious issues, and we don't seem to understand, and they're out there, and these young ladies going to get into relationships.
Yeah.
And they're going to think a lot of the time the way how these men treat them, or even these boys treat them, is okay because of the abuse that they have.
Because he beats me because he loves me, you know,
They don't
that's
seem to understand that.
Yeah, it's the attention. He's beating me because he cares. And if he didn't beat me, that means he didn't care about how I behaved.
That's why it's so important. That's why it's so important for us to actually be into the school and go and do these presentations and do a lot of these prevention education in the schools for our students to understand that, hey, this is not healthy. This is not right. But we have to also take into consideration when they do disclose their story. Now they need help now.
Yeah.
We have to take that into consideration. Our students need help.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking about high school, we're talking about starting in elementary school.
Thank you. And parents don't know. Parents don't know. You know, they think that their innocent little boy isn't doing anything wrong. And next thing you know, that your son is holding up girls in the bathroom and threatening them. If you don't let me do certain things to you, I'm going to beat up the person that you do like.
And we also got to keep in mind too, girls are aggressive out there.
They do that.
It's not just
they do
the
that
boys.
to other girls, and they do it to other boys.
We have a lot of girls out there who are very aggressive also, and who are being abusive to boys, and boys are being abusive. So we got to keep that in mind also too. We can't just pinpoint the boys alone. We got females there who are very aggressive also too.
Well, ladies, I mean, I really appreciate the job that you do, because it makes such a difference when you can present us this information. And it's not just coming from a school where you're always hearing from, you know, the principal or the teacher or the counselor about some nonsense. This is coming from people who have researched this topic. They've seen evidence, they've seen examples, and you've shared that you've even been through it. So this was very meaningful and appreciated. I don't see any further questions. So ladies, I will allow you, as I thank those who attended this workshop, If I notice, I did see a couple counselors online. If you please send me an email so that I can send you a certificate, karen.chancellor@vide.vi. And I thank you for attending. Students, I really appreciate it. Make sure you tell your counselor so you can get some community service hours. And ladies, I'm going to let you have the last word as we close out, if there's anything else that you'd like to tell our listening audience.
It's not your fault. You can get help. Please support others. Please be compassionate and take down our number for DVSAC if you ever need any support, or even if you want to volunteer and support our mission, we're also here for that. Thank you.
I also want to leave, if we have any parents online, if anyone is listening, please talk to your children. They're not too young to learn about their body, because it's important they know about their body and not to be ashamed of their body. They need to know the correct name of their body part. I just left a wonderful training that we did, talking about prevention, education, and child sexual abuse. I mean, excellent, excellent training. There's a lot of information that I have that I got through this training. So if there are any counselors out there and want presentation, any teachers out there want presentation, I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you. And everyone, have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good day, parents. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you found the information valuable to understanding the VIDE's functions and beneficial to your ease of engagement with the Department of Education. You may access this information anytime by visiting vide.vi and clicking on the For Families tab. Thank you.